The debate on minimum wage has been going on for quite some time now. Should we raise it or keep it the same? And what are the consequences if you do? I'm going to be telling you why we should not raise the minimum wage. Increasing the minimum wage would force businesses to lay off employees and raise unemployment levels. The Congressional Budget Office projected that a minimum wage increase from $7.25 to $10.10 would result in a loss of 500,000 jobs. In a survey of 1,213 businesses and human resource professionals, 38% of employers who currently pay minimum wage said they would lay off some employees if the minimum wage were raised to $10.10. 54% said they would decrease hiring levels. San Francisco Office of Economic Analysis said that an increase to $15 would reduce the city's employment by about 15,270 private sector jobs. The fallacies of the opposing argument are that when companies pay their employers more money, then the company doesn't make as much profit. So when the minimum wage increases, they have to let some people go to balance it out. So increasing the minimum wage would force businesses to lay off employees and raise unemployment levels, which brings us to the issue of poverty. Raising the minimum wage would increase poverty. A study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland found that although low-income workers see wage increases when the minimum wage is raised, their hours in employment decline. And the combined effect of these changes is a decline in earned income. Minimum wages increase the proportion of families that are poor or near poor. As explained by George Reisman, Ph.D., Professor Emeritus of Economics at Pepperdine University, the higher wages are, the higher costs of production are. And the higher the costs of production are, the higher prices are. And when the prices are higher, the smaller the quantities of goods and services demanded and the number of workers employed in producing them. The reason why increasing the minimum wage wouldn't reduce poverty is because it would only help the people who still had their jobs after this increase. Many people who are poor or near poor will lose their jobs, which increase the poverty. Raising the minimum wage would increase poverty, and it has the potential to hurt or even close down businesses. A minimum wage increase would hurt businesses and force companies to close. 60% of small business owners say that raising the minimum wage will hurt most small business owners, according to a 2013 Gallup poll. Jamie Richardson, MBA Vice President of fast food chain White Castle, said that the company would be forced to close almost half its stores and let go thousands of workers if the federal minimum wage was raised to $15. Forbes reported that an increase in the minimum wage has led to the closure of several Walmart stores and the cancellation of promised stores yet to open. Many large businesses would not be affected by an increase of the minimum wage because they're already making so much money it wouldn't hurt them. Since small businesses are starting to grow more and more in America, it could really hurt them because their profit would go down as they pay their employers more, which ultimately hurts the business. A minimum wage increase would hurt businesses and force companies to close. This brings us to the price of consumer goods. Raising the minimum wage would increase the price of consumer goods. A 2013 article by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago stated that if the minimum wage is increased, fast food restaurants would pass on almost 100% of their increased labor costs onto consumers, and that other firms may do the same. A 2015 Purdue University study found that the raising of wage of fast food restaurant employers to $15 or $22 per hour would result in a price of 4.3% and 25% respectively, or a reduction in product size between 12 and 70%. NBC News found that the price of a cup of coffee went up by 10 to 20% in Oakland, California, after a 36% minimum wage hike in the city to $12.25. The report also found a 6.7% rise in coffee prices in Chicago after the minimum wage rose to $10. Some fallacies of the opposing viewpoint are that over the years, when a sudden significant increase in the minimum wage occurs, the prices of consumer goods rises as well. Raising the minimum wage would increase the price of consumer goods. This also affects the teenagers and young adults in the workforce. Teenagers and young adults may be shut out of the workforce if the minimum wage is increased. Minimum wage workers are disproportionately young. According to the Pew Research Center, 16 to 24-year-olds make up 50.4% of minimum wage earners, despite representing only 13.7% of the workforce as a whole. 24% of minimum wage workers are teenagers. Matthew Rosu, Ph.D., Associate Professor of Economics at Susquehanna University, wrote in a 2014 article that the federal minimum wage has a devastating impact on teenagers because firms will not pay many young workers with no skills or experience minimum wage, let alone a higher wage. Casey B. Mulligan, PhD economics, professor at the University of Chicago, stated that the Teenage Employment Index fell sharply after the minimum wage increase of July 2009. The opposing viewpoint believes that raising the minimum wage will improve the productivity and economy, when in reality it does the opposite. The teenagers and young adults are the future of this world, and those experiencing unemployment at an early age have years of lower earnings and an increased likelihood of unemployment ahead of them. Teenagers and young adults may be shut out of the workforce if the minimum wage is increased. This also affects the low-skilled workers. Raising the minimum wage would disadvantage low-skilled workers. From an employer's perspective, people with the lowest skill levels cannot justify higher wages. A study by Jeffrey Clements, PhD, and Michael J. Wither, PhD, found that minimum wage increases result in reduced average monthly incomes for low-skilled workers. $100 less during the first year following a minimum wage increase and $50 over the next 2 years due to a reduction in employment. James Dorn, PhD, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute, stated that a 10% increase in the minimum wage leads to a 1 to 3% decrease in employment of low-skilled workers in the short term, and to a large decrease in the long run. The opposing argument doesn't see that if the minimum wage is increased to $10.10 and the jobs that presently pay $7.25 had to pay $10.10, then workers who previously would not have considered those jobs because of their ability to earn $8, $9, or $10 per hour will now consider them. The effect is exposed to the workers whose skills do not exceed a level corresponding to $7.25 per hour, to the competition of better educated, more skilled workers, presently able to earn wage rates ranging from just above $7.25 to just below $10.10. Raising the minimum wage would disadvantage low-skilled workers, and it can also affect the upward mobility. Increasing the minimum wage reduces the likelihood of upward mobility. Don Boudreaux, PhD, adjunct scholar of the Cato Institute, explained the minimum wage cuts off the first rung of the employment ladder, and it's that first lowest paying rung that provides the skills and experience workers need to reach the next rung and to continue climbing their way to a better life. Seth Zimmerman, PhD, assistant professor of economics at the University of Chicago, stated that the minimum wage laws could lead to a labor market rigidities that make it more difficult for people to move up the economic ladder. These rigidities can decrease relative mobility and can decrease absolute upward mobility as well. John W. O'Neill, PhD, director of the School of Hospitality Management at Pennsylvania State University, stated that an increase in the minimum wage to $10.10 or higher would decrease opportunities for upward mobility in the hospitality industry, where entry-level hourly roles are traditional routes to the top, and where workers learn the skills needed to gain a promotion. Many companies in all different fields, employers usually have to start at the bottom of the food chain and work their way up. The opposing viewpoint doesn't see that if we raise the minimum wage, the entry-level jobs are gone and can lead to many other problems. Increasing the minimum wage reduces the likelihood of upward mobility, and lastly, the federal government shouldn't determine minimum wages. The free market should determine minimum wages, not the federal government. A survey by the Small Business Network found that 82% of small businesses agreed that the government should not be setting wage rates. According to Per Byland, PhD research professor at Baylor University, the federal minimum wage disrupts the balance of the market and prohibits the creation of new jobs. Byland stated that the free market should determine wages based on the value of work produced so employers can hire the needed number of workers at wage levels that make sense for their businesses. According to Mark J. Perry, PhD of the American Enterprise Institute, government-mandated minimum wages are always arbitrary and almost never based on any sound economic cost-benefit analysis. In contrast, market-determined wages reflect supply and demand conditions that are specific to local market conditions and vary widely by geographic region and by industry. The opposing viewpoint is that the federal government should control minimum wage, when in reality every business is different, so every business should have their own minimum wage. Market-determined wages result in more employment opportunities for unskilled workers, increased profits for companies, and lower prices for the consumers. The free market should determine minimum wages, not the government. Overall, I believe the minimum wage should stay where it's at and not be raised. But everyone has their own opinion. Just make sure you do your research thoroughly before picking a side. Thanks.